Come in. Does that sound? All right. All right. So this talk is about how we hack into different computer systems. My name is Stuart Fay, and I work with Lattimore Black LBMC here in town, and I head up a lot of our pen tests and PCI type of work. And so, really, this talk today is really just some examples on what's real world's out there, what a lot of companies are doing well and mainly not doing well, and just kind of how we take advantage of that as pen testers, and how real world bad guys are doing the same thing. And so I'm going to go through a few items. I've got lots of stories I can share over the years. I've been doing this for a long time on things that might surprise you, and how big name companies and government offices are doing things. So we'll go through it. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't actually gone through this exact presentation yet, so hopefully it'll be about an hour. But we'll see here. So, when we talk about, pen tests and what the vulnerabilities are, there's really three phases of what we're talking about there. Get an initial foothold, getting some type of system level access, and then, as I put on here, pivot mercilessly into an organization. It still holds today, as it had many years ago, that most organizations are pretty soft once you get in the internal of the network. And a lot of times the way we do pen tests, we'll do them in phases, right? We'll do a assessment that is external only. We'll take knowledge of really just the external part of our assessment and see what can happen. So we'll present an example to an organization where this is what the risks are for somebody who's coming in from Russia, from China, et cetera. We'll then kind of do a separate test where we say, what could somebody do who's already inside the network, whether that's ignoring the fact whether they could have done that remotely or not. That insider threat, we'll take that as a separate scenario and kind of demonstrate what the risks are there to clients. And we'll go through some of the things that we do there. So last night I was kind of tweaking this slide deck, and when you watch the movies, for those of you who may or may not be in this industry, there's a lot of movies and TV shows out there that make it seem, ridiculously easy to hack in, right? You've got all of these different shows and stuff. So I found this YouTube clip that it's only a few minutes long, but let's go over it. It's kind of got some highlights of some of the more famous and infamous hacking scenes, showing how great it is.
I'm trying. It's moving too fast.
This is not good. 45 seconds.
Get the sound.
Your laptop is really, really loud back here.
That's as far as my laptop goes.
Oh, here we go. Ready?
Turn every cell phone in Gotham into a microphone.
And a high-frequency generator receiver.
I've hacked this security system. IRC, Internet Relay Chat. It's how hackers talk when they don't want to be overheard.
Sorry if you guys can't hear this. I thought the microphone might pick it up.
Oh my god. What? Oh my god. This is the scanner hit from the fax machine. And you'll capture the images of the account numbers off the server screen and transfer them to this. 10,000 songs, 10,000 account codes. It doesn't make a difference.
It's using a polymorphic engine to detect the code. Whenever I try to gain access, it changes. It's like solving a Rubik's Cube. It's fighting back.
Boy, I'm good. I come do for screens. I need them. Time for a little transparency.
Yes!
Oh my God, she's in the system.
Access denied. Access granted.
Request data transfer control.
That's how we do it right here.
Insert your stolen card now. Go baby, go baby, go baby. All right.
Rabbit is in the administration system. We send a flu shot.
Rabbit, flu shot, someone talk to me.
Not really.
Stanley used the power of man
Well,
to call on the powers of evil.
There's references to a file, but I can't find the file.
What's it called?
They're level 10.
He plays his video game. A game console. It's like a computer, isn't it? You think you can get to level 10?
I'll create a GUI interface using Visual Basic. See if I can track an IP in this.
Hey, you. I want to talk to you about Venus. Do you know who stole her avatar?
He's making a run for a boss.
Nobody screws with Boris Grishenkov. Spike them.
Do you know anything about hackers? Can you jam the console cowboys in cyberspace? It's a Unix system. How the files fall apart.
Kilo Khan, I call you.
Kilo Khan is here.
I have a mega virus monster for you.
What does she do?
Invades digital air conditioners to create a neurogas.
So that's how the movies and TVs portray how easy it is to break in, and we'll see how far off they are from reality. So they make it seem really easy. You do a couple keys and you're in. Companies spend a lot of money trying to break in, and hopefully it's not that easy to do. I talked before about the kind of two parts of the pen test that we do. The first is an external part, and then an internal part on a lot of engagement. And these are just some common ways we typically try to break in. Phishing emails, social engineering, weak usernames and passwords, Office macros, Java applets. There's a lot of vectors out there for the bad guys and viruses to get in. And we see in a lot of our clients that they're not spending the money on the right things, right? A lot of money spent on server-side exploits, patching your systems, IDS. As you'll see as I talk more and more, that a lot of times that's not what the bad guys are doing, right? They're circumventing those controls and going really right to the users. That's where we're seeing really the big risk is it's the users. So, it used to be very common that if you could have, you hardened all your systems and you were patched and you had a good firewall and IDS that you were secure. It's really not. This has been around for a while, but with everyone needing access from home all the time, it used to be just a few people in IT needed remote access, and they were the only ones that really had access outside of business hours and outside the office. Well, over the last many years, really, everybody gets remote access. Everybody gets to be able to VPN in, use Citrix. Webmail from the internet has been, accessible for a long, long time. And that creates a lot of big risks for companies. And I'll explain how we take advantage of some of those in just a second. So, like I said before, it's really all about the end users. And when we do our testing, I almost assume that most of our clients are going to have a fairly secure external network, but they're not going to have secure end users. And why do we target the end users? Well, as this slide shows, they're the ones with all the access. You can lock down every bit of server code you want, but there's still a username and password that gets you onto that system, that gets you into the network. And so hackers have figured out a long time ago that don't bother going for the hard stuff, go for the easy stuff. And the easy stuff is sending a phishing email to an employee and getting their username and password, and you just log in. There's no 90% of the pen tests that we do, there is no exploit used. It's taking advantage of access that somebody else already has. So getting somebody's username and password and using that to our advantage in one way or the other. And the other beauty thing about that is you bypass IDS at that point. When your IDS is out there looking for, Nessus or Nmap scans and SQL injection and this and that, when you're just logged into somebody's VPN using a username and password that's valid, that doesn't raise a red flag with anybody. Nobody's looking for that. There are ways to get around that by maybe looking for, that VPN login from Russia, but even most companies aren't doing that. They're logging all that, but they're really not sophisticated enough to correlate, why is my users logging in from Russia or the Ukraine or wherever it might be. As long as my IDS sensor is fine, then we must be fine. So back to my hacker video out there. Is it really that simple? Take a look at this screenshot here. This is a modified screenshot from a web page that we use during some of our pen tests. It gets sent in the form of an email to targeted users, asking them to click on a link and log into the site. We give various scenarios on why you might want to click on a link and log into the web page. When I first came up with this page, I really was a little skeptical on whether it was going to work. Just simply asking somebody to log in. We don't try to hide the fact that our website is theirs. We don't spoof the fact that it's IBM website.com or whoever the client is. This is a third-party website that we just buy the domain name, and when they go to it, we just simply ask them to log in with their client credentials. And if they do, we get their username and password on our system. So you get that, plus the fact that most clients are going to have that associated with their network, remote access, SingleFactor Authentication, username and password. So it really is that simple. You ask for somebody to give us your username and password. You'd be surprised how many times they do. If your environment has got single-factor authentication, you just log in. There's no exploit. There's no scanning. There wasn't a single vulnerability taken advantage of. We didn't even do a port scan, right? We just simply logged into their environment, and this happens over and over and over again. You're going to get owned. Let's take another example. Let's say you have double-factor authentication for remote access. You send somebody an email like this. It just so happens this is one we use common, a interview or a job offer request, and it just so happens that LBMC is looking for people in IT security, PCI type of work. If anyone's interested out there, kind of talk to me after this. But this is very similar emails that we would send out to somebody else. We send it to HR. We send it to other people within the organization. Hey, take a look at my resume. What do you think? am I good for the job? When they open it up, it looks something like this. And Jessica's very, very forward thinking. She uses Flash for all of her emails. It's probably might have been a part of a school project for her to create her resume and Flash. But to see the Flash, you've got to enable the content on your system, right? So you've already told the person you sent the email in the email that you should expect to have some type of Flash-based thing. Well, when they see this, they're like, well, I guess I'm going to have to enable the content to see their resume. And when they do, they get out. That's it. Again, no exploit. Everybody's patched. Nobody's the wiser. The beauty of these two types of attacks is when people are wise to them, they very rarely bring up the issue to IT. It's one of those things they see an email, like, oh, that's spam, and they move on. And so they were wise to it, but nobody in the organization knows that this was sent to 30 other people, and at least one other person clicked on it. So we really find that even the users that are tech savvy, because it's not a obvious hack against their organization, the website they go to is not associated with theirs. It's a third party. The email address that we send these things to are Google email addresses. They ignore them. And so the smart people ignore them, but don't call IT about it. So we find that it's very rare that we actually get people alerted to these type of attacks. And so you can assume that the real bad guys are doing the same thing. You get these links, you get these weird emails, and you just ignore them, you delete them. Good job for me. I'm really smart. I didn't click on it, which is true, but somebody else in your organization got it too, and more than likely they did click on it. A reporting system. Most IT organizations should have a way to track these things and do something about it. As a side note, we also do tests where we'll be inside the network and we'll run a tool that we do know has a chance to get caught by AV, and sometimes they do. And in those cases, again, when we first started doing this, we're thinking immediately somebody's going to be raising alarms and things are going to start happening. We're going to get detected, and we'll be a good job for the companies on the company side. But 9 times out of 10, even when they have a reporting system or they get an AV alert, the AV alert goes off, it catches the malware, in this case, our tool, and the IT guy at the other end of the line gets an alert and it was taken care of, right? It was caught, and so no more action taken. And reality is that was just when the bad guy tries one thing and it gets caught, they just try something else. But definitely needs to be a reporting and a incident response plan for these types of events. And most organizations have an incident response plan; they're just not very good. Here's another little fun fact that you might be surprised is out there. Next time you go to your work computer, open up the Internet security settings for Internet Explorer and see what this user authentication process is. It should be on prompt for username and password, or automatically log in only in Intranet Zone. I'm surprised. This doesn't happen a ton, but I'm surprised how often it will be set for what I just set it to here, which is automatically log in with current username and password. If that's set on a domain joined computer, anytime you go to any website anywhere and it asks for an NTLM authentication, your username and encrypted password get sent to that website. Without your knowledge, you're not entering anything. It gets sent. And so if it's a malicious website that's got a capturing device on it, they're now capturing your username and encrypted password, which, don't worry, if you got a strong password, you're safe, right? We'll show you how that happens here in just a second as well. But the point being, there's just so many ways that an organization can be compromised without a single IDS setting going off, without really without any knowledge from IT at all. And so, when we do these types of tests, we always assume that we're going to get one username and password. You should always assume that somebody in an organization is going to give up a username and password. And so when we kind of do our pre-assessment with the organization, we tell them that it's not if we're going to get a username and password, it's what are we going to be able to do with it afterwards. And so, if you guys are out there working in IT somewhere, it really should be, I know a user is going to give up a username and password in some shape, form, or fashion. What other controls do we have in our organization to minimize that risk, right? And the biggest thing is two-factor authentication, and we'll go into a lot of them later. But if you can minimize that, what the value of that password is, then it really doesn't matter as much if they give it up. I'm sorry? This, I had set it to, on my own computer, it wasn't set to this, so I just currently changed it to show you what it was. But by default, it should be in an intranet zone, but you just never know. People, tweak their computers. Maybe a GPO policy is being pushed down that, you're not aware of. Mistakes happen where you just never know what the setting is going to be. You might ask, but man, we have spent a lot of money on a lot of different things. We've got all these vendors coming in. We've got all of these things. We got an IDS and an IPS. It's blocking IPS too. So any attacks can get blocked. And we've got a new firewall out there, and we've also got a web application firewall and DMZ zones. And we spent a lot of money on tons of things, right? I mean, companies are constantly buying toys to help protect their environment. What we find is that these things aren't really addressing where the real risks are, and the real risks are to the users. I mean, that's why there's so much spam out there. The spam works. As the presentation before us, the Viagra emails everybody gets. You always wondered why they send so many Viagra. Who's going to be buying Viagra from some spam email that you get? Well, evidently somebody is, because they wouldn't be doing it. Same thing with the phishing emails. I mean, people are falling for this, and that's why they do it. And we find that a lot of organizations don't spend as much of their effort and time as they should on things like that over some of these more sexy boxes that you can buy from a big name vendor. Not to discount some of these tools, but they don't really address the current risks that are being taken advantage of out there right now. So before we go into internal, that's really where we find the big risks are externally is the phishing emails, the ability to get that username and password. That's key in so many organizations. It doesn't matter if yes, sometimes companies are going to have a SQL injection issue. They're going to have some type of other flaw out there, but we find that less and less common out there, right? I mean, people are doing a pretty good job of locking down their boxes, avoiding those types of issues. But if you've got single-factor authentication to your internal network, whether that be through Citrix or VPN, then you're asking, somebody's probably on your network or has been. In addition to that, there's a lot of issues with, we've got to let our users in. We've got to let them, be on the network for this or that. And you've got to balance those two things as an organization. But it's pretty scary to be able to go in. I mean, we did a pen test recently for a large organization that, it was a simple, and I didn't put it on here, but it was we just simply called the help desk, right? They were secure. They didn't have any issues externally. They had single factor. We didn't do the phishing. We picked up the phone. We found somebody on LinkedIn. We said, we're Joe user. Forgot our password. It's the weekend. Can you reset it? Sure. I'll just set it to the default. It's welcome one. So, now we've got VPN into their environment. And we also know that there's probably a lot of other passwords out there called welcome one out there. simply just by calling the help desk, and that's bigger companies. That's the bigger problem with. We'll do this test to smaller companies, and it's not going to happen because everybody knows each other. And in fact, we did it for a company that we thought was a pretty big company, and we picked somebody off of LinkedIn, and we called the help desk, thinking that it was a good person to pick. And we called the help desk up, and we're like, we're such and such user. We tell them our story, and they're like, I know such and such. You're not. You're not that person, because I personally know that person. So it just happened that was the wrong person to pick. But we find that very few companies have got the right procedures to validate who their users are. And asking who your boss is not the right one, right? You just call up ahead of time and you say, can you tell me who such and such boss is? I need to, make up some story why you need to do that. And so that's not a good way to do it. And I'm not gonna lie, it's a challenge to come up with a good way to validate, a remote user, especially when you're a multi-city, country organization that has to have help desk, or you've outsourced your help desk to a third party. Mm-hmm. So in that particular one, it was a relatively small IT organization, and they were aware that we were going to do these tests, and so the help desk person did properly tell the security group about it, and we continued our testing, and just noted that as part of our testing, because it was not a true nobody knows about the pen test type of a deal. So we continued, but and that's the other thing. Sometimes we'll do these type of tests, and the person will never report it. They'll just and then we could have at that point really you just call and say for somebody else. So it's definitely important for really all the different parts of the organization to have true incident response processes in place. The challenge, everything's comes at a price, right? So the challenge there is, you've got potentially a lot of things that your IT department needs to be chasing down, and so you've got to filter through that noise. We tell our clients all the time that you've got to figure out some of the key alerts, key logging, key things that really are important to you. There's so much logging that companies are required to do through compliance, and gigs of data every day. And you got to just figure out what really is a big deal to me. Getting more into some of the inside stuff. If you've renamed your administrator account, which everybody does, right? Then that if somebody ever logs into the administrator account using the name administrator, well, that's a problem because you don't use it. And so we make recommendations about that all the time to filter out the noise. So internally, I don't think I've ever been on a pen test where I don't get domain admin access within a day if I'm allowed to just plug into the network. And these are the reasons why right here. All you need in almost every organization is a single username and password, right? So our tests, we typically go in without the assumption of any password at all. You're going to give us a network jack, and that's it. And we're going to plug in, we're going to see what we can do. We typically, and every pen tester has got a little different methodology. I personally don't do any, I don't do any scanning. I don't do any vulnerability, assessments. I simply try to get a username and password. Doesn't matter who it is, as long as it's a valid domain account. That's all I care about. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. This SMB challenge response, password cracking, SMB, relay attacks, man in the middle. Some of these other ones, this default JBall stuff and whatnot is a separate thing, but common in most organizations. There's a lot of ways to do that. And we hear sometimes, well, we've got really strong passwords, and my favorite is when the IT guy says, "You'll never get my password. It's so hard. It's 25 characters long," and I'll tell you about how that doesn't matter anymore here in a minute. But over the last several years, no matter what password you have, well, I say almost what's considered a complex password today still can be cracked very easily because the real research guys have really come up with some really good mangling rules for dictionary-based attacks. So, you've got tools out there now that takes a big dictionary, you put your hash against it, and it mangles it all kinds of different ways, and it's going to get most passwords, fairly quickly. And I'm going to demo that here in just a second. We again find a lot of companies that spend a lot of time on SIM tools, patch management, those types of things, but that really doesn't do any good if you've got weak usernames and passwords, or you can get on the network using one of these techniques here. So there's a tool called Hashcat that I like out there that has got some really good mangling rules. And so I took a hash from actually a recent pen test that we did. This was me doing this last night. So this the hash that I took is an NTLM hash that those of you who know a little bit about this, you can tell me that you don't need to do this for an NTLM hash, but just for example standpoint, we'll use this, even though it's technically not necessary for NTLM due to a thing called pass the hash. But so you take the hash that you've gotten off the network somehow through that where I said the user would send their username and password if that button was checked. You put it through a dictionary like this, and so what this says, this 1000 just tells you what kind of hash it is. This is where our hash is, and hash.text, and this is the rule base that it sent, that it is going to look it up against. And RockU is a default dictionary list that comes with a lot of the security distros. So you run the tool, and there's two hashes in there. The first one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's not, of course it's going to get that one, but it's going to run just a little bit longer. And I didn't pick a super hard password just because this box is not super efficient at cracking. But here's the password for a decent password: yellow 456 with a capital Y. Right, the 9-character password, uppercase, lowercase, numbers. It cracked it in 30 seconds. You'd be surprised how hard the passwords will be that will crack using that exact command I had up there. And so the point being with that is, internal users, even with strong passwords in today's technology, that password's going to be cracked. So we've got this password now, yellow 456. It's going to work on somebody's internal network. What do we do with that? Let's go back to our slide back here. Most organizations out there are going to have a couple of things. It's a given they're going to have a couple of things. They're going to have an additional username and password on their network as part of their AD domain that the username equals password. It's going to be some shared computer out there. Maybe it's the scanner computer in the warehouse. Maybe it's the front desk. But even if we didn't crack that password, there's going to be a password out there that username equals password that you can use. So once we get that password, another given at every organization is there's going to be a admin password in a text file on your network share that everyone can find. Every organization. So don't worry about the patching, So we just go and we try to find those passwords, right? And at almost every single engagement, every single corporate client that we do this for, we find an admin level username and password in a text file or a config file on a share that whatever random user that we've got a username and password for can find. And, and that's it, right? Once you do that, you get on, well, I'll go through some of these other steps here in a second, but it's pretty much over at that point. And again, we find that organizations spend a lot of money on a lot of the wrong things. The locking down the file shares and getting users not to put passwords in text files is something that's been a problem for a long, long time. It would have been fixed now if it was easy, but it's not super easy to do, but it's really where instead of spending the $10 million on the box, maybe you should spend $5 million on a project to lock down your file shares. So privilege escalation. We've got the single username and password, the normal AD account, and a lot of organizations, once you have that user's got admin access to their own computer, right? Everybody gives their users. Very few companies don't give their users admin privileges. So if you can connect to their box as themselves, as an admin, you can get the local password hashes, right? You crack those using just the tool that I just told you about, or you don't have to. You can use a thing called Pass the Hash. You then find a server that user account is admin on, and there's one out there somewhere. The last couple of years, there's several tools out there that will dump clear text passwords. So in a Microsoft world, when you log into a box remotely, it keeps your password in a known encrypted people call it unencrypted in memory, but it's really encrypted, but just with a known key. No matter how hard your password is, no matter how long your password is, if you're logged into a system, there is and you have admin access to that system, you can run a tool on that box that will tell you the clear text password of anybody who's logged into it. It doesn't matter if it's 100 characters. It doesn't matter. It's clear text. And so now you've got the admin password of whoever that is, and a lot of times it's a domain, it's a domain admin who's logged into it, and now you're domain admin. Again, no hack, no exploit. It's taking advantage of good old Microsoft. That's it. That's really the steps that it takes for the bad guys to get in. I know of several companies here in town that had publicized exploits that I had some knowledge of that there was no way to know exactly what happened, but a lot of these similar processes were followed to escalate their privileges. And so that's why it really goes back to, you've got to protect your passwords at the very beginning. One password from one user on the internet who fell for a phishing email compromises your entire network, and it's really easy to do, and a lot of bad guys are doing. The target breach has really brought up the risks here, and we're getting a lot more questions about that. But it's kind of scary. And so, there's lots of things that you can do to help protect yourselves as an organization, but none of them are perfect. Again, the biggest thing that we tell our clients to do is get rid of the single-factor authentication. If you get that domain username and password, and you can't do anything with it, who cares if you know what the username and password is? If you're not on, if you're in Russia, you don't have physical access to their environment. That password doesn't do you any good. It's really the blocking and the tackling part there, and unfortunately, it's hard to keep up with this stuff if you're not a full-time pen tester or a full-time security person. These new tools that keep on coming out are not something that you as the IT guy knows about all the time, and so it's hard to keep up with it all. But you got to start somewhere. And it's locking down those shares is just another big way to do that. You got to have the basics. You got to have hardened. You got to have a lockdown system. Don't give your domain admins. They shouldn't be logging in with, their domain admin credentials to their laptop. We find that people are inherently want to do things that are convenient, and you can't blame them. But we had an organization that had, they're doing a lot of the right things. They had separate domain admin credentials and regular credentials. And we had happened to compromise this one system that we were only able to find non-domain admin accounts on. But we did note that one of the guys that had logged in was one of the domain admins, but it was just his regular account. Well, he uses the same password for both domain admin and non-domain admin accounts. So that control throughout the door because of that convenience factor. So it's there's a lot of unfortunately in IT IT has to do everything right, and the bad guys only have to find one mistake, right? And that's the challenge today: is one mistake gets you owned, and unless you're perfect, there's going to be a problem. And so, you got to mitigate, and you got to figure out what the best things you want to look at first are. But it's challenging out there. Let's talk about some of these suggestions. We talk about, the two-factor is the one I stress a lot. Disabling office macros is another big thing that most companies don't need anymore. That it's an easy way for people to exploit a system without any, there's no AV is going to go off. It's a low risk item to send out, but if you turn that off, it really reduces that risk there. Firewall rules being locked down. Everybody knows that Java and Adobe and Flash are constantly being have exploits out for them. But it's unfortunately they're one of the last types of devices to get patched. I always find it ironic when we go into clients that have really good patch management processes, and they've got the default windows for patching their servers and 7-day processes for just really good processes for patching their critical servers, but they don't have any processes for patching their end user workstations. And the end user workstations are they're really the systems that are on the internet, right? Their servers are behind 10 different firewalls, and really only at risk if your internal network is already compromised. I really tell clients that they should reverse their thinking on their patch management priority, and their number one priority should be their workstations, not their servers, because that's where the risk is. That's where all the risky activity is happening is on the workstations. Yeah. No. IT, there's so many regulations in IT now that companies have to follow. I mean, there's, PCI, and they all have requirements to do patching, 30-day patching or so. And so you still got to patch your servers, right? There's still a risk there. But, if you only do one thing, it's patch my server first or patch my workstations first, I would patch the workstations first because they're the ones who are going to get attacked over your servers. We encourage people to regularly phish their employees. We do the phishing that we do is kind of part of our attack and penetration testing. And the way we do it, the users aren't aware that they're being phished. It's not really an education process, but there's tools and processes out there to do it where it's just an education process, and it's for the companies that do it regularly, we definitely find them to be much more savvy about some of this than others. Yeah. So with outbound traffic, there's a lot. Everybody's got a lot of specific rules to only allow port 80 and port 443 through the firewall. But once you're inside the network, you should really do just as good of a job of locking down what ports and connections can go through. It's not a perfect solution because you still got to allow web traffic through and whatnot. But if you can knock down as many ports as you can going outbound, it's just that much harder for a virus or a malicious person to get a connection back out to either do a command and control, as the talk was talking about before, or sending data out through other means. Just one more layer of defense. Yes. Anything else on that? Internally, Another thing that I assume is going to happen at all relatively large organizations as well, there's going to be a default JBoss or Tomcat system out there. You know, it's going to have admin, Tomcat on it. And if you find one of those systems, that box can be compromised. Regularly doing internal vulnerability scans is important. Unfortunately, what happens is we'll find organizations that do regular vulnerability scans, and people are busy, and so it gets dumped from the scan tool into maybe some other type of tool, and it really gets watered down on what it finds. Unfortunately, sometimes a lot of these vulnerability scan tools will not categorize. They'll find something, and it'll be in the report, but it'll be an informational line, or it'll be something that's categorized maybe a low risk that with these automated security vulnerability processes never gets looked at. Nobody ever sees that they should change, their default password on there, or maybe the tool's not sophisticated enough to actually try the default password. And so some of the things that are relatively high risk issues in terms of being compromised don't ever bubble up on these automated scan processes. Somebody's not really looking at it who understands and can go through it. And sometimes it's just not their fault. I mean, just too much to look for, but other times it just maybe a change of process would help that. I mentioned the password hash things, and there's really not a great solution there. Making that password hash as hard as possible to crack is really your best solution there. It's not realistic to have your users have some crazy password that nobody's going to be able to ever crack. But it is realistic to make sure that you're only sending NTLM v2, which is the hardest of the Microsoft password hashes that are out there. That is realistic to put in place. Not a foolproof for these password hashing technologies, but it's better than sending just the NTLM hash, or even landman that we still see out there sometimes. Again, I mentioned before, it's the passwords on the network. Like I said, that's the first thing I do on an internal pen test. I just go to whatever the main file share is. I just go and start searching for files that are fairly common that are going to have usernames and passwords in them, and I always find them. Always. You as an organization, can you do your own searching for your own ones? Another story. There was a company here in town that they accept credit card data for various things, and this company stored their credit card data for various reasons. Encrypted database. They were locking it down. Had a lot of things. As part of the pen test that we did, I'm just snooping around, and typically I do this manually. There's tools out there. Metasploit's got some, and there's different ways for you to kind of automate some of this. But I typically do this just manually. I'm just using a Windows computer, just logging in, and I come across a file that was named, I forgot what name, but it was a SQL file. And I opened it up, and it was a SQL script to unencrypt the credit card data for some report. Now, if any of you guys are familiar with PCI, which we do a lot of PCI type of work, there's supposed to be all kinds of controls around securing that and protecting that key. With this organization, it was just on a text file on a shared document. So I took the text file that had the unencryption key in it, through another text file on the same share that had the database username and password, connected to the database, did a query, put an unencrypted key, and unencrypted the credit card data. Took a screenshot of it to show them, hey, this is not a good thing. So it really is critical that you guys can identify shared passwords. And the standard response is don't put them in text files, right? Don't store any password unencrypted on the network. Sometimes that's not possible. In that case, you just really got to lock down who has access to it. You got to lock it down to, a very granular layer. The default all domain users is not the group that you want to have access to all this data. Yeah. So I did a pen test for a company here recently that utilized GitHub for a lot of things. And they had a guy real smart guy who actually had recently left. Him leaving had nothing to do with the rest of the story, but he at this point was no longer an employee. And he had on, publicly available GitHub repositories all kinds of data on his internal network. And there's no usernames and passwords, but there was an SSL cert out there, and there were just all kinds of data about their internal network, what kind of systems they had, connections to them. It was ridiculous. It was all on GitHub. So yeah, it's out there. It's honestly not that common to find that much data, but it's definitely out there. And so a lot of times in our assessments, if you've got, again, we kind of do the two separate assessments, but we'll always report that if you've got single-factor VPN access, whatever we did via the internal assessment, you can assume we could have done and somebody else could have done remotely from anywhere. That initial foothold, that initial username and password that we get, preventing that from just totally taking over your internal network. There's a lot of different things we recommend, clients doing, and we demonstrate during our pen test. Don't allow users to be admins on their own computers. Easier said than done, but it is, I think, one of the number one ways to mitigate a lot of the viruses and the worms out there. If you're doing, if you got a user out there that is clicking on all kinds of links, and they're not admin, it greatly reduces their ability to get compromised. Having different users for different things. If you're a local server admin, you should really have a different ID for that. Should have a different ID for just doing domain admin things. Things that are really not that hard to implement. They're really just separate usernames and passwords. The key is to have different passwords on them, right? Again, we did another pen test for an organization that PCI, credit card security, and they had a segmented credit card data environment. And so you had to have they had separate authentication for anyone to be able to get into the credit card data environment as they're supposed to for PCI. Everything was working well, had it locked down. Really no way to enumerate what was in that environment at all. However, one of the IT guys had an account on both sides, and the password was the same. And so we were able to compromise the non-secure side, right, the regular corporate environment, get his password, and just by, assuming or guessing that it was the same, use that password to log into the more secure environment and got to where the credit card data was. And these are things that you just got to, teach and make sure your users and IT guys are aware of. Segmented network is key. Should really all your workstations be able to connect to all your servers, and if you're on the server, should they really be able to connect to different parts of the environment? And mature, secure organizations, we really see where they do a good job of VLANing off different areas of the network. People in the marketing department don't need to be talking to other workstations in the server department and vice versa. And so those are all things that are, I think, beneficial controls for organizations to put in. The first thing that's on here, the disabling of network login for local accounts. Again, nobody ever uses your local account. Everybody's work computer has got a local administrator password on it that nobody ever uses. IT doesn't use it. Nobody ever uses it, but it's there. And if you're admin to your computer, you can crack it. You can get that hash. Well, that password, more than likely works on everybody else's laptop. And in some organizations, it works on every other computer in the network, including all the servers. So if you can prevent local accounts from being used remotely, then you reduce that risk of me knowing that password gets me on other people's computers. And that's when we tell companies that, they get, oh, but what happens if there's an emergency? What happens if the network is down? We need to get on the computer. And it's, well, you physically can go to the computer. It almost never, the risk, they say, is the reason why they need to not allow this to happen is and almost always not a real valid reason, especially for the benefit that it has. So if you guys are interested again on some of these other things out here, there's some links for mitigating pass the hash, which I didn't really talk about, but pass the hash for it's been around a long time. Hopefully you guys know about it. But if it's not, that's where in a Microsoft world, if you can get somebody's password hash, you don't need to crack it. You can take the hash and, as it says, pass it as the password. And so it doesn't matter what it is, you can pass the hash without knowing what it is. In today's world, that people don't even need to do that because there's other techniques out for dumping the in-memory passwords, and you can get it clear text now. And there's several tools out there to do that. But here's some additional things if you guys are interested in it. And so that is it. That is me. If you guys have any other questions about this, I'll be glad to answer them. Yep. We don't find that as a very common problem. Most of the time, again, it's during our pen test and like the hackers would use, we go to the path of least resistance, right? Why go for the hard stuff? And typically, your networking equipment is a little bit more. It's going to be more secure than the rest of your environment, and so. Nobody in their right mind, including the guys from Russia, are going to go after the hard stuff. Why not go over the easy stuff first? And the easy stuff is your users and the access to their shares and their computer, which then gives you the access, then compromise the network admin's computer and get his password, and then you just log in. So I did. So it just happened that guy... he was logged into one of the computers that we had compromised, and we dumped the clear text passwords and got his password. Yeah, it was Smashville with some elite speak on it. So, yeah. The front desk, we didn't talk about physical security things, but I like to pick on the front desk people during physical assessments. And so I don't think they're any less, aware or not aware than anybody else, but just because you can walk in and you can give them a good story, without a lot more question, we do kind of pick on them a lot. But on external assessments, we don't find them any more vulnerable than anybody else on clicking on links or doing anything like that. The mobile device stuff is coming up more and more. We again find that it's a lot easier to go through these other vectors. So again, why go for the hard stuff? We're finding it more and more that mobile devices are being tied to users' corporate wireless. And so if you're using corporate wireless, again, we didn't talk about this either, but if you're using corporate wireless with a enterprise level security, so you got a backend radius server that your Windows credentials are being used to authenticate against, that mobile device you can spoof a access point and obtain, again, the password hash unwittingly of that mobile device, and then just using the valid username password, log into your wireless. But we don't typically attacking directly as our first vector a mobile device is not something that we tend to do a lot of. I think password managers are a great way to circumvent some of this. That looks like that's our time. I would think password managers are good things. That are on the internet? Occasionally, not very often, but I have seen them before. Not with allowing any Microsoft networking ports open on the internet, but I have seen one actually here in the last year that one had a web server listed on the internet that was the domain controller. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.